Hello and happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to another live, as it's happening in real life, episode of Mom at Home. Very excited today. We're hosting an acoustic guitar roundtable with three phenomenal musicians here to talk about their craft, their relationship with the acoustic guitar, and how it's affected their career, how their life, their approach to making music on it. And we decided it would probably be a good idea to throw another guitarist into the mix. So we've got Mr. Bill, as we always do. He has no choice, does he? No, he does. But welcome, everyone, for today's Mom at Home. So glad to have you. Yasmin Williams, Eli Winter, Cameron Knowler, and Mr. Bill. I'm so excited for today's conversation. How's everybody doing?
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bill to get the ball rolling and start our episode.
There you go. I was jumping the gun right there on you, BJ. We're doing great. And I got to tell you, I'm in guitar heaven right now because you three are three of the most amazing guitarists I've ever come across. Before we get the ball rolling here, I do want to thank Eli. You actually reached out to Jillian Harrington at the museum suggesting, hey, we'd like to do a guitar roundtable. And Jillian, thank you for passing that over to me to say, what do you think? And of course, I know what I thought. So, it took a little arranging because there's three of you, but we got you here and we're so happy to have you here today. Thank you for being with us. And BJ and I just love to help artists broaden their reach. So that's what we're doing today. You're also writers, and by writers, obviously composers, music, but you also write prose, books. And Eli, you are a 2021 Lumen Arts Fellow in Creative Writing. Congratulations for that. You've got several essays with The Economist, Chicago, Texas Highways, Brooklyn Rail. And then Cameron, you've also written a book as well. We're going to talk about that a little later as we go. So welcome. Here we go. Let's talk about acoustic guitars. To me, both the nylon and the steel string, I think nylon first, of course, then steel string, they've been around for centuries. And yet every generation of guitarists seems to be able to pull new sonic territory, new nuances from the instrument hundreds of years down the line. The three of you are no exceptions. So let me start. Cameron, we'll start with you, then pass it to Yasmin, then Eli. What do you three think it is about the acoustic guitar that lends itself to so many sonic iterations? Cameron, why don't you start us out?
Well, I think that I think of the guitar's history kind of in a dual way, almost like a bifurcated trajectory. There's the organological history of the instrument, which is a lot of reconciliations, right? I won't go too deep into it, but it borrows tuning from other instruments, and structurally, it borrows architectural cues as well. But then through kind of its like pedagogical history, it's almost something of a toy. It's like an appropriated instrument that is what I feel like it does best is it seeks to sound like other instruments. So then its meaning kind of exists somewhere in the shadow of those interpretations. So and I think it's so versatile, just like inherently. It's like you can get a large guitar with a large sound, and its structural history has kind of been at odds with other acoustic instruments and fighting for volume. But in addition to its tuning and just being a polyphonic instrument, it's just songs are able to lay out on it because you have so much control over how many voices you can engage. And I think Yasmin and her playing, it kind of epitomizes that. So
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. I think it's just it has an interesting history that's always reinventing itself depending upon its context.
Yeah, good. Yasmin, I'm going to hold off before we get to you because I want to comment on something, Cameron, that you said.
Yeah.
One, you said it borrows its tuning from other instruments. I'd like to know what that is. But you also hit the nail on the head when you talked about it trying to be heard over the course of its life. And in fact, in the museum, we addressed that very theme in the first part of our Gallery 1, where we feature making the instruments. We talk about how the acoustic guitar needed to be heard and what players and what builders did to address that situation. So what instruments would you say it borrows its tunings from?
Well, it's an interesting conversation because it's not exactly determined, but because it's odd that it would be the E and A string, they're a fourth apart of the D and G string, and then the G and B string would be a third,
Right.
and then a B and E another fourth. So people believe that it actually came from the piano, and
Interesting. Okay.
I think that that's the most kind of airtight argument for that. But in terms of its fingerboard displacement, I guess the whole line of zither instruments, and how they become fretted over time, and of course, I'm sure your museum talks about the X brace and its factoring in
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
volume itself. But I would say the piano. I would say the piano is what people have kind of made the case for most strongly.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, Cameron. Yasmin, how about you? What is it about that instrument that that makes it so interesting?
Yeah, I agree with I agree with basically everything Cameron said, but for me, it's particularly its versatility. Um, in throughout its history, I feel like a lot of people have tried to make the guitar sound like something else, especially nowadays with the percussive finger style players. They use it a lot as like kind of like a drum thing, which is what I do, like a percussive thing. Some people use it as a strictly melodic instrument. Some people try to use more polyphonic techniques. And you can do all of that and then some with the guitar. And that's not really the case with practically any other instrument, or at least any other Western style instrument. Just versatility for me. I mean, I like to think of it as like 10 instruments in one.
So true. And
do
you're
whatever
right.
you want
You wouldn't
with
want
it,
to see an
really.
oboe player beating the oboe on the side of a block of wood to get percussion out of it. Piano, obviously, prepared piano,
Exactly.
they do. And we're going to see a little later on in the hour some of your approach to the finger tapping. Now, when you're playing that way, Yasmin, do you think of it as more of a percussive instrument at that point?
No, I just think of it as a guitar, and I think of the guitar as something that is kind of infinite in its potential. I don't think anyone has really reached like the guitar's full potential in terms of what it can do. I mean, to me, it's almost like kind of like a symphony in one thing. Whereas you can treat one guitar as its own ensemble, and so if you have multiple guitars, then it's kind of like multiple. I don't know. It's just you can do a lot. It's just it's way it kind of goes over
Well,
my
you've
head.
done a heck of a
I
job.
don't even really know how to answer the question.
You're right. It is.
Like I've only
Oh my
done a
gosh.
little bit
Wow.
with it
Okay.
in my mind.
That's very humble.
So, I don't know.
And I think you kind of nailed it there when you said how versatile it is and how we really haven't opened it up all the way. And that's going to come in future generations down the road here. Eli, what's your take on all this?
Well, I think that, Cameron and Yasmin I think about the various parameters you can alter on the guitar in ways that, to my mind, suggests, if not more versatility, a different kind of versatility than, say, the piano might have. The ability to play unison notes on different strings, and to play those same notes with quite different attacks in a way that, for example, the piano, just to think about the relationship between piano strings and the tunings or piano tuning to the tuning of the guitar, that's something that would be quite difficult to really replicate on piano, given the nature of that instrument, and the ability to tune guitars far out of the reach of even standard open chords. I mean, those are only a couple parameters I could really think of, if they're even just one parameter, perhaps. But like with Yasmin's playing, for example, or any number of improvisers too, the like wide range of extended techniques you can apply to the instrument too, stands out in a way. Maybe it's something to do with that the guitar kind of. I wouldn't know how to arrive at why this would be the case, but I could imagine the guitar as an instrument, certainly the acoustic guitar, maybe facilitating those various possibilities and the ones that we haven't either enumerated or become aware of in our own playing or understanding yet, just by nature of its presentation. Like it'd be hard to imagine. I used to play clarinet. It'd be hard to imagine somebody like doing any kind of percussive playing with a clarinet in the way that you could do on a guitar, just for nature of that instrument's own limitations. And so I suppose this is a long way of saying that the limitations the guitar imposes suggest a more expansive way around them than other instruments. That feels a little,
For sure.
No, I think that's, again, all three of you really nailed that answer. It's when you pick up a guitar and you first start strumming with a pick or finger picking, it will present ideas to you that you can explore. And as we've seen, maybe a totally brand new approach to the instrument. Now, as each generation is coming up with their new approaches, do you think there's a little resistance to traditional playing in there, sort of getting away from tradition, exploring new musical territory? But while at the same time, it is tradition that is our springboard to get us started. Is there a balancing act or one over the other? Yasmin, let's start with you on this one.
Oh, okay. I was hoping that. I mean, for me, I didn't have any knowledge of whatever tradition existed when I first started playing. I didn't really listen to acoustic music. I didn't really have any reference point for acoustic guitar, which was probably why I started off pretty weird in terms of ideas that I had, like lap tapping and I mean alternate tunings to me were just natural and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't think I avoid tradition. I just wasn't aware of it when I first started playing, which was probably a good thing for me. So I wasn't really bogged down by any rules, or I didn't really have any sense to just follow anything except what was in my head and in my heart. But yeah, I think, had I known about like the sort of Piedmont blues players, like Etta Baker or Elizabeth Cotton and people like them, I probably would have followed that more.
Right.
Just because it's just more relatable to me as a player. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's inherently bad if someone kind of forgoes tradition and does their own thing. That's perfectly fine. And there's kind of no real way to do that, because at the end of the day, you're going to use some techniques that someone did,
whether
50,
you know
60
you're
years
using
ago.
those or not.
There's no way around that. So.
Matter of fact,
exactly.
that's
whether you know or not.
That's how they're born.
I just
Somebody
didn't
does
know.
something,
So.
and that becomes a technique. And I will say, Yasmin, watching you play, I think there are people now studying what you do, and that will become a technique to them as well. And not having those boundaries that you felt, okay, well, this is the box I have to stay in when I'm playing guitar. It's, you don't know what you don't know. So you just went for it and came up with something very uniquely different. Cameron, how about you?
I think I relate to Yasmin in my own musical upbringing in that I was playing electric guitar, and it wasn't until I was 15 that I found bluegrass music, and something was inherently kind of appealing about peeling away the layers of the chain of events leading to a sound. Like I felt that there was something, there's different ways to quantify what traditional means. I think in this context, definitely it's like a musical heritage, something to take ownership over, and that take ownership of in your own way. And I think that's what I was lacking. And so for me, I built a structure off of finding who I was people I was listening to. I wanted to figure out who they were listening to, because I think that there were some I was noticing some the areas of like what I'll call magnetic north that I was kind of drawn to. I experienced this feeling that there was something more eternal to what they were saying. And I think that, being someone who studies the music, I think I'm guilty of this myself, but I think just the pedagogy of folklore tends to paint these traditions as static, which I would make the argument that they're inherently progressive, especially as it relates to the guitar. And I'll definitely further on in the conversation, we'll definitely be looping back to this, but the guitar traditionally exists in flux because it's actually a highly politicized instrument, because it's not a lead instrument, it's not a rhythm instrument, it exists somewhere in between, and it's how we reconcile those things. And so I think going off of what Yasmin said, her finding the Piedmont people like Elizabeth Cotten, I think that those things don't necessarily require someone to, make a formal study of them early on, because I think that people can abstractly respond to their influences in more modern music. But yeah, I mean, in and of themselves, they were spokespeople for traditional music, but their physical approach to the guitar was so deeply personal, especially Elizabeth Cotten, who had the guitar strung normally and it was completely upside down. That's just a superficial example, but I think, for my own playing, it gave me ownership over a tradition. I felt like I was a part of a conversation, which is something I was lacking more generally in life, which I think is what kind of propelled me to that music abstractly.
And again, you bring up an interesting point there, Cameron. So often what guitars do is born out of necessity, being the mother of invention. Strung the guitar upside down, all of a sudden there's a different way of playing. Jimi Hendrix just flipped it over. He didn't, now maybe I'm remembering wrong. Maybe he did restring it upside down. Anyway, help me here. There's a tremendous player. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but his name is Thumbs Carlisle, and he played, Thumbs with his guitar on his lap, again, tapping. Could bebop like the greatest jazz guitar players out there. So Eli, how about you? Tradition or resistance?
Are you asking about, remind me the scope of the question?
As far as your approach, are you more thinking, I don't want to play what's been played before? Traditionally, I want to sort of resist that and find my new territory.
Thank you. This reminds me a bit of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the extent to which we talk about the guitar in terms of its ability to emulate other instruments.
Yeah.
And I've found a lot of inspiration and interest from listening to and learning about players of other instruments, especially solo instrumentalists, and trying to at least think about, if not to incorporate within my own playing, how they might have arrived at a certain aspect of their playing, or some aspect of their playing that would have held special interest for myself. Like I think about Pauline Oliveros, for example, a native Houstonian like myself, accordion player and pioneering electronic musician, and all sorts of other things too. I think about a record of hers called Accordion and Voice, which has a song called Rattlesnake Mountain, where she sustains a long drone. She sustains a long drone and plays a melody over it, as she, I suppose, spontaneously composes, thinking about the mountain in question, and discovering that for the first time, and turning it over and over again for the first times, plural. Was really generative for me in thinking about how I could attempt to replicate that same circumstance of a sustained bass note with other melodies on top, in a long, especially a long guitar piece or song, and of course that's something that the guitar precludes because of the nature of its notes decay. But nonetheless, that was something that I found really generative and continue to find really generative. that particular song, that particular instrument. Another person who comes to mind right away, though I haven't really spent enough time yet to really dig into quite how I would be able to replicate the aspects of his playing that so move and thrill me, is this South African expat jazz bass player named Johnny Diani, who Cameron and Yasmin have heard me talk about. The Kingdom Come Back most of this year. And there's something about the playing of these various other instruments that appeals to me, or I shouldn't say appeals to me. It's not that guitarists don't, of like the adjacent idioms to what I might do or what have you. But a lot of the players who are first referenced as such, Fahey or Ravi Basha or what have you, to the extent they were, to the extent they might have held interest or seemed like what I might do would be in conversation with them. It was more as a way to, more when I was first starting to play guitar about 8 or 9 years or so ago. But even then, I was thinking about other guitarists outside of that world. Some of the most moving guitarists for me are certainly several from the label 3 Globe recordings: Jack Rose, Daniel Bachman, Steve Gunn, and the various more experimental things they might have done. But I also think about other guitarists outside of whatever canon you might want to describe. And so I guess this is a long way of thinking about the extent to which I wouldn't think about wanting to resist or uphold, if you will, though that's a shorthand, resist or uphold tradition through the lens of like my particular, open tuning, steel string, fingerstyle guitar playing, as much as I would be interested in thinking about how I might do in context of other players, and thinking about that what I might do in conversation with other instruments and idioms and such. Chicago, is a simple example as well, of course, Chicago and jazz or free jazz or improvised music is something that's continued to really excite me, interest me over the last few years of living there. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And in fact, Eli, you used the word conversation a couple times in there, and I think that's a perfect word to describe what really all musicians are doing together when they're playing, whether it's 5 guitars on a stage together or you're one guitar in a band of rhythm sections, so on and so forth. Conversation is so important. And I don't think when you're conversing, I know that when we're conversing right now, I'm not thinking of every word. Has that word been used before? Maybe I want to avoid it because it's a traditional word, right? So you are really approaching it as, this is the conversation I'm going to have right now. I love those answers, everybody. And that just nailed it for me. Now, teaching and practicing, of course, are a huge part of all of your lives. Anybody who decides they're going to make a life of playing an instrument, well, you better darn well know that you're going to be practicing that instrument, hopefully every day, if not every day, at least every other day, just to keep your chops alive. But teaching also is something that's important in your worlds. And Eli, I'm going to stick with you here for a minute because your bio says that you are self-taught, which I really find incredible when watching you play. Now, you said you started about 8 years ago, and was it, I think you also mentioned clarinet, but when you picked up the acoustic guitar, Carolyn, our executive director, talks about finding your voice, and she had played piano for many years, but when she picked up a cello, that was her voice. Is that how you felt when you picked up the acoustic guitar, Eli?
No.
No. Okay. Expound, please.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, part of why that became the case was, I mean, the learning curve of learning guitar, any kind of guitar notwithstanding. When I was first really starting to actively listen to music, which was around the same time as I started playing guitar 9 years or so ago, a bit over 9 years ago, I think by now, I was listening to, I was just starting to listen to bands like Pavement and Sonic Youth, who do perhaps not dissimilar things to what Yasmin and Cameron and I might do, but with an entirely different like timbral arsenal, if you will. And I would struggle to pick out the tunings that they would use for their songs because of capos and because of the processing and distortion behind the guitars. So I would look up tabs or other things that might lead me in that direction, and find pretty quickly that I wouldn't be able to replicate any of those approaches on my little, at the time I had a little Seagull acoustic guitar, which if I were to tune it in the ways that Sonic Youth would on insert song here, you know, I would end up either busting the guitar in half or busting the strings. And I don't know, I've found a lot of, this is something that I feel like Yasmin and Cameron and my approaches diverge quite a bit. You know, I understand Yasmin's approach, if you will, over the course of our careers, if you can even use that word this far, as one in which there was a kind of comfort in arriving at a new, unforeseen or previously unknown technique or approach or some such to facilitate playing the instrument. Whereas I found it really helpful to find precedents for the sorts of things I wanted to do. I found it really helpful, for example, to discover Jack Rose's record, Kensington Blues, which was the first time I really realized that a guitar without formal training in a certain idiom, jazz or classical or what have you, and without other instrumentation or nor voice, could do the same amount of work if you figured the shorthand. And but you know, just making more and more discoveries, if you will, like that along the way, which is of course ongoing as well, is something I've found really helpful and heartening. H-E-R-T, H-E-A-R-T, pardon me.
That's great. And I love your description of discoveries along the way. I've always seen those as plateaus. As with anything, when you're working at something, you might feel like, man, I'm stuck on this flat road. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're up on that next one. And you stay there for a bit, boom, the next one. So the approach to either working with a teacher who's taking you through this process by rote or learning on your own. As you said, you were listening to the tunings of Sonic Youth and trying to figure them out. So in so doing, you might not have been thinking of it, but you were learning a process right there in how to discern these different notes. Yasmin, it also says in your bio that you're self-taught. You started, what, about 12 years ago? I see electric guitar in 09, then electric bass, classical, 12-string guitars. And I just watched another interview the other day where you mentioned that you started playing the kora, which is a fascinating instrument. In only 11 years, 12 years, you've reached heights that most guitarists can only dream of. And that's just truth.
Thank you.
How was it that
Appreciate it.
How was it that the steel string acoustic sort of became your go-to instrument?
So I started playing electric guitar first, like Cameron, and I played a lot of like hard rock stuff and even some metal stuff. That was kind of my angsty phase, I guess, as a kid. And yeah, that didn't really last too long just because I felt like it was very repetitive. You know, like there's only so many sweet picking lines you can do before it's just kind of the same thing over and over again.
Tell that to Frank Gambale.
There's only so many. Sorry, I mean, for me, there's only so many power chords you can play before it's just like, this again. I mean, you know, exactly. And, you know, just staying in standard tuning became very monotonous after a couple months. And yeah, so steel string guitar, once I got over my initial bias of it just being like a singer-songwriter kind of boring thing, I realized that, wow, this is an instrument that can really express basically whatever you want it to. As a solo person, of course, you kind of have to go through hoops, at least I did, to figure out ways to do it in a way that I could do it as one person without a band. So teaching myself how to do percussive stuff, teaching myself how to do kind of harmonics and lap tapping and all that was cool. But it was really just, I just love how the steel string acoustic guitar sounds. I think it sounds very mellow, nice, just harmonious. At least the music I play is that, or I tried to make it that. And I don't really know why, because I actually started with clarinet too, in third grade, and played that for like 16 years, I think. But yeah, just guitar was just the thing that caught my attention. You can just do so much with it, like we were talking about earlier. There's really no end to kind of the rabbit hole you can fall down. There's always a technique you can learn. There's always something you can think about and try to transfer to guitar, whether you hear another instrument and try to transfer that sound to the guitar, or whatever you want to do. So it's really just its versatility and its sound and timbre, and just modern lutherie makes guitars look really cool too.
So true.
Which is a whole other thing I could go on about forever. But yeah, just all of these things to me just makes guitar like a super cutting edge thing. And it's just something that I was passionate about at 12 and I'm still passionate about, and will always be probably.
Once the acoustic guitar grabs your heart, it doesn't let go. And there is a sparkle to the sound of a steel string acoustic that's like no other. And I know you've all had this experience where you're playing your guitar and all of a sudden you reach for maybe the 3rd fret, you end up hitting the 4th fret, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, that creates a pretty cool sounding chord. There's that ongoing exploration that never stops with that instrument. Yeah,
exactly.
Now you also though play the harp guitar, which we'll see a little bit later on in the video that we'll share. When did you add that to your repertoire?
Last year. Well, actually, really, no. I got it last year and added it kind of this year. But it's basically, to me, just a regular thing. It just has extra strings. It looks more intimidating than it actually is. Once you kind of figure out what to do with it, just the only thing about it is tuning is a headache, because you can easily break the second neck if you tune with too much tension. Wow. But other than that, I mean, it's just like a regular guitar. It just looks beastly.
They are different. I picked one up and I lose my whole frame of reference. I don't know where the low E and the high E is.
That was kind of me for a year. Like it took me a minute to wrap my head around how to play the sub basses, but once you figure it out, it's definitely worth the journey. It's a beautiful sound.
Cameron, let's come back over to you. So it sounds like all three of you then have played electric guitar. But then became more in tune with the steel string acoustic. Would that be right?
For me, yes. And just to remind myself, the question 2 relates about learning, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, as I said earlier, there was something so immediate about an acoustic guitar as compared to playing through effects processing.
True.
That
Very
was, I guess, abstractly kind of how I approach knowledge, and I think that this kind of goes back to the nature of like open tunings versus standard tuning, because I play in open tunings, but I mostly play in standard tuning, and I didn't play in an open tuning until I had really focused in for 5 or so years, and I think there was something quite literal about standard tuning and, transcribing bebop lines from horn players, which I was very envious of. Whereas I think a lot of people look at the instrument for its pluralistic opportunities. I look for its ability to be distilled. And I think that the teachers that luckily my first guitar teacher held a very similar philosophy, but then the teachers that I sought out more consciously when I wanted to take greater ownership of my just fundamental skills as a musician, but also my aesthetic sense, have been people who tend to gravitate toward that kind of ground up knowledge. And I guess one thing too is, like, in addition to not playing in open tunings, I play mostly with a single striking surface, which is almost like tightrope walking, and you kind of have to not that you don't have to be, that you're less selective if you have open tunings and finger picks, because that's not true at all, but you have to make considerations in terms of how certain things are going to be implied, almost like painting, like stippling or something. Like, when you have to make decisions your decisions start at a lower kind of framework, because you have to work in little dots. So, but yeah, I think for me, hearing Norman Blake's like old 30s D18 through like great microphones on the record Whiskey Before Breakfast was like, okay, that's like that's what a guitar should sound like to me. And I'm still after that.
Yeah. So that's the sound that really spoke to you when you heard
that.
But Cameron, I think it's really fascinating that you also earned your degree in jazz performance, which I'm going to assume that's where the electric guitar came into play in your life.
It actually kind of flipped. I got early on. My first guitar teacher had a Parker Fly, and I really liked that guitar. And so I got a Parker Fly. I was learning like Guns N' Roses riffs, and then and like when I found fiddle tunes, I was like, well, this isn't wholly dissimilar, but there isn't more freedom, because anything, but just the framework of it was more malleable. But then I found a professor in Texas who was really into Western swing, which was really kind of a good middle ground between the flat picking kind of bluegrass stuff I was doing and the bebop that I was going to study in school. So throughout school, I played an electric archtop, but I played a Telecaster, so there was a lot of electric guitar going on, but I was always at home practicing on acoustic. So it kind of went in opposite order. It was like electric, acoustic, and then electric with an acoustic kind of foundation.
Okay. Now, jazz chops are really kind of a different animal. And do you find that having those chops is helpful in your flat picking and also in your teaching of that style?
100%. Yeah, I think that there's something, without going too much down the rabbit hole. I spent a couple of years studying with a old-time banjo player named Adam Hurt, and his approach to approximating Southeastern fiddle stylings on banjo is kind of operates with a similar logic as like the way that Charlie Parker was organizing his lines, and how that maps onto guitar. Because if you have a finite number of 8th notes or 16th notes and you start on an upbeat, you're always going to land in the same rhythmic placement. So that's actually something that I've applied to flat picking guitar to give people a more structural approach to, how do they most not only ergonomically but tastefully render a line. And so like the idea of like a phrase as line is very much a jazz borrowed concept.
Right. Okay. So you obviously have a real strong passion for teaching. And in fact, you wrote a method book called, and I love this title, Cameron, Guitars Have Feelings Too. Tell us a bit about that method book, if you would.
Yeah, it was kind of when I was younger, like maybe 16 or 17, when I got reintroduced to guitar through flat picking. I was taking copious notes, like, just basic considerations, like, and what I realized was I was just kind of investigating, like, what I would call like epistemology, like what is the thing that compounds that makes this, like, what are the fundamental considerations, the micro and macro considerations that lead to true understanding of a concept. And so back to what I was saying earlier about kind of heeding these abstracts, more eternal forces behind music. A large part of that was kind of uncovering the style behind Norman Blake. And so I found a lot of, going through the bluegrass canon and ending up like finding work in an old time string band and going to old time fiddle festivals. I realized that Norman was synthesizing these early sources in ways that I think I responded to abstractly when I first heard his music. And so the book started as a treatise to kind of uncover some of those elements of style, and then it just started compounding and multiplying past the point of real control. So then it came to like, okay, I need to prove this point, so I need to go back into recorded history and make a case for that by transcribing. So it's a very transcription heavy book, but it's also creative in the sense of making a new appeal to history. which I think Norman did, but that's a whole other conversation. So it started with Norman and then became this whole other thing of how to see flat picking guitar as a continuation of dance traditions, whereas with bluegrass guitar players tend to learn fiddle tunes from other guitar players, which I think is a fundamental irony that I wanted to address.
Wow.
So it's kind of in short, it's just trying to find a unified approach to melody and rhythm through flat picking guitar.
Through flat picking. That, to me, that's a totally unique approach to a method book. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
You talked about transcribing, and Eli was talking about listening and trying to pick out tunings, open tunings, and so forth. Those are both great ways to just really stretch your ears and your musicality. One of the things I found fascinating, and I'm sure you've all stumbled across this in your playing, is what I call chord duplicity, where a dominant 9 chord without the root can also be the minor 7 flat 5 and another root, minor 6 and another root. It's just this fascinating ecosystem of sounds and of notes and of characters that all come out in different ways depending on, say, what your bass player is doing. Anyway, there you go. Here's my tangent. We can go off on that for a while.
Well, that's a great point.
Eli, you mentioned that your album, The Time to Come, cites Hurricane Harvey as being inspirational to the compositions on that album. Now, we've all gone through, and really, I don't know that we're quite at the other end of the tunnel yet, but this turbulence in the last year, 3, 4, 5 months. Have any of you, and Eli, I'll start with you, then Yasmin will take it to you, and Cameron finish up with you on this one. Have any of you written music based on the lockdown, the shutdown, the social distancing, all the new things we've had to deal with? Eli, how about you?
No worries.
You're good to go.
Thank you. The short answer is no, and I can expound if you want.
Sure.
The longer version, I suppose, is, I guess, twofold. Both that I've found it extremely difficult to work on music during this time. The records that I've been able to release on vinyl, for which I've been really fortunate to have released, had all been recorded before the pandemic started, before lockdown started in the States. I've found it very difficult to not to entertain music so much as like a profession or what have you, as much as I've found it difficult in such a, this is cliche, of course, but a profoundly destabilizing time for everybody, regardless.
Sure.
Even given the relative ease and privilege with which I've been able to, get to this point, I've still found it quite difficult to, provide the requisite bandwidth to work on music that feels worth finishing, which isn't to say that I haven't. But I haven't to the extent that either Cameron or Yasmin have. And I would also feel, for what I would want to do, on the one hand, I would find it quite difficult to hold my own interest in using circumstances from lockdown, for example, as generative for music, say. At the same time, though, one thing that I've tried to become more mindful of in terms of how I frame the music once it compositionally has realized itself, whether that means it's a spontaneous composition or an improvisation or a fully fledged composition of whatever period of development. Is the extent to which the music can function as a political response just by virtue of the choices you make. behind it. They're undergirding it, I suppose. And the
BJ, I think we've got a little situation there, but let's carry on. Yeah, so I think Eli will reload and get back with us.
to where
See, rolling with the
Rolling with
punches
the
there.
punches. Yasmin, let's have you address this, if we may. Again, the question is,
Sure.
did this lockdown period inspire you to write any new music?
Yeah, inspired an entire album. I wrote. Oh, is he back?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. I wrote most of the
do whatever you feel
songs
comfortable for
on my latest album, Urban Driftwood, last year, and I recorded all of it last year. Got it mixed, got it mastered, put it out this year in January. And had lockdown not happened, I don't think I would have finished the album at all last year. Probably not this year. So it was very generative for me. And just so I live near DC, and I went to a couple protests in DC during June, July, that time of the year last year when the Black Lives Matter movement was really heating up and social justice and consciousness was kind of becoming a headlines throughout the world, really. And yeah, that inspired a lot of the content on the album. And just as well as just being in lockdown and not being able to do anything music related because it was all canceled, that kind of gave me an opportunity to appreciate the things around me more and appreciate the little things. So whenever I'd like go to Baltimore, for example, because I was there quite a bit, I'd look around and people usually think of Baltimore as like kind of like a concrete city. There's not much nature around. There's just, kind of chaos and violence, and our previous president didn't really help that. But when I went around and I saw a lot of greenery and parks, and I was like, wow, this is really nice. And there's a lot of nature in the area that I live in, which people don't really think is there for some reason, though it's pretty right in front of us. I just focused on the things that I could appreciate, that were within reach, since I couldn't really go anywhere. And that album's kind of the result of that. And it was. A lot of my musician friends were telling me like, "Oh, how are you writing music now? There's so much going on," and they were still upset about lost shows and just like social climate sucks, and oh man, it's just every day there's 1,000 people dying, and I'm like, well, yes, that's true. That's all horrible, but I mean, I guess for me to keep my sanity, I just kind of reverted back to the thing that I enjoy most and the thing that I'm good at doing, which is listening to music, writing music, playing guitar, and just kind of focusing on that, since that's the only thing I could really focus on. And it was fruitful.
Well, you said a lot of great things in there, particularly about the cities, because every city, I don't care where it is, has its beautiful spots. You just need to seek them out. You may or may not know this, but Amsterdam has this amazing forest called the Amsterdam Forest. And when we think of Amsterdam, we think of busy, thousands of bicycles and, get out of my way when you're on the streets. But we rented bikes and took this 10-mile ride. All of a sudden, it's like you're in the Shire. We felt like hobbits riding our bikes.
Really
so if you're in Amsterdam, check out the Amsterdam Forest. All right, I'm getting tangents here. Absolutely. But also the fact that everything impacts people differently. So Eli, Yasmin, you have totally disparate responses to it, and it's just how it impacted you. Last month we had a wonderful trio of female singers who called themselves Decadames, and it was the lockdown that inspired them to say, you know what, we're all sitting around at home not doing anything, let's start putting this trio together. And they've come up with a tremendous band. Cameron, how about you? What was the lockdown experience like for you in terms of writing music?
I think that it thematically didn't necessarily inspire music with maybe programmatic meaning, but I graduated in May of 2020, and the majority of my work at the time was playing kind of hired gun songwriter gigs in Texas, backing up songwriters and teaching in person in Houston. And my entire livelihood shifted online, thankfully. So that I try to acknowledge that the privilege of being able to work from home and being able to take up the empty slack of performing. But I think concretely, not having to learn other people's material, I grew a new confidence for releasing music under my name with Eli and solo. So a couple of records came out under my name, which is not something I put much stock in doing work-wise. But that ended up becoming something viable and worth pursuing. So I've been recording a lot more, composing, and just kind of having the bandwidth to be more selective over the material I'm learning instead of just saying, okay, I have a gig next week and I have 15 songs to learn. It was more personalized, which I'm super thankful for. So I'd say that's kind of how it all culminated for me, and I still feel that way, actually.
Sure. You know, interesting. You made me thought of something very curious there, because I know you now, the three of you, as these tremendous solo artists who play acoustic instruments, just absolutely beautiful. But Cameron, you're talking about, I have a gig next week, I have to learn 15 songs. Do you find yourself on these gigs just strumming 1, 4, 5 because that's what the song is? I mean, are you completely changing who you are as a guitarist for those moments?
Yeah. That's a great question. One of my mentors here in Los Angeles, Mark Goldenberg, has a really great way of articulating this. He says you don't want to get east and west crossed. So when you're on a gig, it's and I think I'm very thankful to have grown up in Texas, because this tradition of song, song, almost like son music or bolero or whatever, like there is a specific ethic, and I think to songwriting that is deeply personal. I think the Texas guys really know how to source guitar players, so there's a rich tradition there. And yes, playing 1, 4, 5, but thankfully the work I was getting, I was allowed to kind of shine through as kind of a soloist, and those people knew me as sort of a solo artist. Like I had released some digital EPs and understood I had somewhat of an aesthetic sense. So, but like listening to people like Steve Bruton, for example, or Norman, in those contexts, I try not to play too much, but I try to play more than just providing the rhythmic fabric, unless that's absolutely what was needed. That's mostly not the case, though. I had room to kind of dance and create little bubbles in between the vocal line.
Which is nice, but you're obviously sensitive enough to know that if that is in fact all that's needed, you better do that, because if you don't, then the phone's not going to ring again for that gig.
Precisely. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. Now you're talking about playing, you're talking about improvising. So Eli, I want to steer this over in your direction, because the concert that I watched of yours, one of the very strong comments was Eli plays these improvisational. That's a tough word for me, but you know where I'm going. Thank you, BJ. These pieces that are just soundscapes, colorscapes, and you just close your eyes and go with them. Improvising is a skill that I know you all are adept at, but my question to you is, well, Eli, let me throw this your way. Yasmin, I want to talk to you about tapping, and then we're going to watch some videos of what you all do. Eli, A, how much do you improvise? And B, have you ever gotten into a situation where you're improvising and all of a sudden you go, holy moly, I don't know where I am or how I got here or how I'm going to get back to point A?
We all have.
I heard that. We all have. And the C part of that question, Eli, is then what do you do when you find that happening?
I can answer the second question first, which is to say yes. And I suppose for the other questions, both in terms of how much I might improvise and what happens in that particular situation, it would vary. contextually.
Mm.
I do think I think this is something that being in Chicago and playing with like a lot of my close musician friends and the musicians I work with, who of course are all friends in Chicago, the commonality most of the time is that they're all people who have played at least one improvised music concert at some point, no matter what like shapes or idioms or forms the music they tend to work on take. And that's something that, though with guitar music, listening to folks like Jack Rose or Riley Walker early on in Houston say, they have given me a sense of how you could improvise your way into a song, or during a song, treat certain parts of a song as the destination and others of the journey, if you'll forgive the cliche phrasing. Being in Chicago has been really formative for me in terms of the ease with which so many of the players I play with, because they have improvised all the time in all sorts of contexts, and play in all sorts of different outfits as well, have improvised. It's helped me feel more comfortable doing that with both Yasmin and Cameron at different points in my own playing. And it's something that I feel like is I'm not quite sure how to wrap the thought up, but it's something that I feel like is thrilling and can be quite scary, and of course, and also to answer the question of how much to try to quantify that would be silly, if only because it's something that I try to implement. It's not something of a concert or a song or something. It's just that it might not feel necessary. Like when, of course, for the duo record that Cameron and I released in March, Anticipation, a lot of that music ended up being sort of spontaneously composed throughout, running it through a few times, and then the documentation of the record is a sort of amber sealed moment of like one iteration of that song. But playing some of that music solo, for example, the first song, Strawberry Milk, the way I've ended up performing it in concert pretty much entails improvising around whatever I might imagine a distillation of the two of our parts to be. And that varies, of course, from performance to performance. And also the ease with which I can pull it off varies a lot from performance to performance, especially if I'm playing outside in like 40-degree weather. But this is a long way of saying that I feel pretty comfortable with it to the extent that, as a self-taught guitarist, I don't have the kinds of frameworks that either Yasmin, who studied music composition, or Cameron, of course, trained jazz guitarists have. So I can only work within my own limitations to that extent.
Well, you do a fine job of working within what you say are limitations. And interesting as I was listening to your response, Eli, what audiences always need to bear in mind is that as a musician, how do I put this? We're not only we're not only approaching to playing a song, but we have all the other extraneous elements that are impacting our lives, whatever they may be. Maybe you got a flat tire on the way to the gig. Maybe you had the best darn day you've ever had in your life. Maybe you just had a filling. There's all kinds of things that are extraneous that come into play. So it's just something I think audiences should bear in mind as they're watching performers. And we're going to actually play some videos here in a couple of minutes. Yasmin, though, I do want to talk about tapping. You've mentioned that you tap, and the video that we'll see is going to showcase that. And as I was researching guitar tapping, my first experience was Eddie Van Halen. I mean, I didn't know what he was doing. I just heard these notes coming out at 900 miles an hour. How the heck is he doing that? And then I saw it. So it was on the electric guitar. So it was electric first. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. And then it started to become adapted by steel string acoustic guitar players.
I feel like there were acoustic players who were tapping in like the 50s and 60s, actually.
Okay, all right.
But I don't remember names right now. But I think electric definitely popularized tapping.
Right, okay.
Especially Van Halen.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, if it does go back to the 50s, then that kind of negates my next question, which was, did traditional acoustic players sort of resist that when they first saw it, do you think?
Oh, I have no idea.
Don't know.
Probably not. I'm thinking of like Buckle White, for example, would tap on his guitar in the 30s or 40s or whatever.
Okay.
But I mean, no. Well, like, do you mean acoustic guitarists of like the 80s or 90s or?
Yeah, I guess
now,
I was thinking probably 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah, was there?
No, I mean, Michael Hedges was tapping away in the 80s.
That's true. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now it's just a competition to see who can do it the fastest, which I'm not interested in participating in.
Good. Music should never be a competition, in my opinion.
Yeah. Plus, it just doesn't really add anything to the music.
Yeah. Nope.
But I don't know. Again, I'm not really aware of what traditional acoustic guitarists thought or think, since I'm not really in the group. I don't really know. Tapping is widely accepted now.
Yeah.
It seemed to be less accepted until Hedges popularized it for acoustic players in the 80s and 90s.
Right. Okay.
And that kind of spawned a whole generation of tappers.
Right.
Tappy
tappers.
Love it. Well, thanks for setting me straight on that. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, believe it or not, we are just slightly over the hour, and you've all been gracious enough to say we can continue on a bit, but I want to share some videos of each of you playing. So Cameron, we're going to start with Cattle and the Cane, and you've been talking about fiddle tunes being adapted for guitar. Can you give us just a little background on this song? And then we'll hit it.
Yeah, Cattle and the Cane is an interesting modal tune. Historically, it's always been a parallel modal tune where the A part is in major, B part is in minor, without much transitional material to account for modulation. This version is actually, I'm glad you sourced this, because this is like an early record that I really liked was Blake and Rice, which is Tony Rice and Norman Blake, and they both play Cattle and the Cane. They play together, but they do not play together. They both record it separately. But this version is kind of, the first time through is kind of like how, if I remember correctly, how Tony would play it, and the second time through it's Norman. Whichever way is more chordal is the Norman way. So I got this ironically from another guitar player, but I am aware of the fiddle sources. So I'm not a walking self-contradiction.
Well, it's beautiful, Cameron. I want viewers to really pay attention to your picking hand because it is so smooth. No extraneous motion. Anyway, don't let me talk too much. Let's play the video.
All right.
so smooth, man.
You know, as
Thank
we
you.
were watching that piece, I was going back to the beginning of our conversation today, and just kind of thinking on your philosophy, how the guitar is, like, it's not a form of mimicry, but it's also these types of, there's other instrument voices that you can achieve through just the singular instrument. I really got tapped into the old, like, the banjo sound. I really felt like there's a prominent banjo voice inside that guitar that was just, yearning to get out. I'm like, wow, that really hit me in that moment. So
Wow.
fantastically cool.
Thank you. That
Yeah,
means a
very
lot.
cool. And interesting, Cameron. You mentioned the jumping back and forth between major and minor. It's so smooth, you really don't notice it. If you hadn't prefaced it with that, you know what I'm saying? It was very smooth.
Oh no, I appreciate that. Yeah, there is a Ted Green philosophy of like articulation in and of itself is a modulation.
Ted Green is my man. I was lucky enough to study with him back in the 80s. What a
Wow,
giant,
we'll have to talk about that. Oh my
giant among guitarists.
Right.
I want to take a second before we're going to get on to Yasmin, your song, Swift Breeze, in just a second, but I want to make sure we share your websites with everyone, because I want everyone to get on that Google thing and check you out. So Eli is eliwinter.com, ELI Winter, just as it sounds, .com. Yasmin Williams music.com, YASMIN, williamsmusic.com, and Cameron Knowler.com. Knowler is KNOWLER. So get out there and check them out, because there's so much more to be found on these on their websites. Amazing. All right. Now, Yasmin, is Swift Breeze, is this, I believe, a newer song? Is this on your newer album?
Yeah, it is, but it's actually an old song. I wrote it in high school.
Oh, fun. Okay.
And I kind of I'm a better player now, so the parts are a little bit more complex, but the general idea and such, the sound is very similar to what I wrote when I was 15 or so.
Man. It's fun to resurrect those songs that you wrote earlier on in your life and breathe your new level of skill into them. So I will say no more. Let's enjoy Swift Breeze by Yasmin Williams.
All right. That's insane. Jeez, that is awesome. Again, I'm reminded exactly of what you were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. How this, you turning these instruments on their head and making an entire orchestra out of them. It's just, it's wild. That is wild.
Yeah. Couple questions for you, Yasmin. I'm hearing a little side stick sound in there. Is that you tapping with your foot while you're playing?
That's tapping with, so it wasn't, you couldn't see in the video, but it's me using my knuckles on the guitar body to get like a bass and snare.
This morning at we have a meeting every morning for all the NAMM staff, and of course we've been doing it online for the last year plus. And I was describing your song Gitka, where you're playing guitar, kalimba, and percussion with both your feet. One of the, and I said, that's very much what drummers go through. Well, one of the NAMMs, several actually, BJ's the drummer,
no,
Eric is the drummer,
that's way
president
beyond what
of NAMM,
drummers
Joel,
have to do.
they're all shaking their head no.
That's shocking. I'm horrible at skit. I feel like that would be more difficult.
I think where the breaking point comes in, like all we have to worry about is four elements, left, right.
Oh.
Whereas then you have an order of magnitude more going on, all the finger work that you're doing, all the notes. I mean,
Well, yeah, like,
we
yeah.
don't really play notes in drums. We, like melodic notes.
I never
So
thought of it
it's-
that
yeah,
way. I really never thought of it
If
that
you
way.
were to, I mean, I took piano as a
Cool.
kid, but if you were to throw like a keyboard on my right hand side while I'm trying to keep a beat with the other 3 limbs, I'm like, no, it would all fall apart.
I never
Not
thought.
gonna happen. And
I don't know.
you mentioned earlier the lutherie these days is creating these amazingly beautiful instruments. They're works of art.
Been very beneficial for me.
The guitar you're
personally.
playing in that video is just gorgeous to look at.
Right.
Who is the luthier? I don't think I caught the name.
So the one with the holes is Skytop Guitars. Eric Weigeshoff is the luthier for that. Yeah, there's just, I mean, this guitar building, modern guitar building is blowing my mind lately. There's just so many weird, great, exciting, like people are using new bracing styles. People are like the whole tap wood thing where you kind of like hit the top of the wood and like see like if it has a sound and if it's really cool. Yeah, it's definitely helping fingerstyle players, I think, reach new heights in terms of their playing as well. Since the instruments are so responsive, it's a lot easier to play and a lot easier to play more complex ideas and just it's a whole new
I'm
dimension.
curious
really.
because we delve into that dynamic at the Museum of Making Music where the artists and the manufacturers kind of exist in this symbiotic relationship where the artist is kind of feeding their like, here's what I really would like this instrument to do. The manufacturer, the makers come back and say, we might have solved it here, take a look at this.
That's exactly how my
Okay,
guitar was built.
Can you explain kind of how that process went for you personally?
Oh yeah, sure. So my Skytop guitar, usually the builder uses, so he doesn't really have a sound hole in the front, which is why you didn't see one. He has 2 large ones on the side. And for my lap style technique, while I love the sound of his guitars with no holes in the front, I needed something with an extra hole in the front or whatever, because when I'm lap tapping, the sound gets muffled because of the side sound ports. So he told me about the sets of wood that he had that had the holes in the front that were like they're natural wormholes. And I didn't know about that. I didn't know that existed. So when he told me about it, I was like, that's like a perfect solution to this really weird problem that I have with your guitars. And it worked out beautifully. So yeah, there's definitely a symbiotic relationship. And I'm seeing a lot more now, these luthiers building 8, 9, 10 string instruments for players just because they want more options, and they're kind of really pushing the boundaries of what we thought lutherie was and what it can be, which is just astounding.
And this takes us all the way full circle to the beginning of our conversation, how these boundaries that really don't exist continue to be widened. Maybe they're there, but they get widened over time. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's beautiful. Eli, again, I want to thank you for being the catalyst to make this happen today. This has really, really been educational, inspirational, funny. And we are going to finish with a song of yours called For a Chizo's Blue Bonnet. I hope I said that correctly. I've got to confess, I had no idea what a Chizo's Blue Bonnet was. So you educated me into the floral world at the same time. Tell us a bit about this song, and then we'll play
it. Excuse me. First, I can say that I'm still sort of unsure as how to pronounce it myself. I think it's Chisos, but I'm also not really sure. But it's a song that I desperately needed to title, and the things that help me title anything are deadlines. I needed an ultimatum to title my second solo LP, even though it only had 3 songs. And it's a song that, sent it to Cameron. Cameron was like, dude, there's this one riff. And it inspired a song of his. And then that song, is a song of his called Sonora Road, which is on his record Places of Consequence, which came out in July. And then something about that title may or may not have inspired, or that circumstance may or may not have inspired the title for this song ultimately. But I will not say any more about that right now.
All right, let's enjoy it.
Absolutely. Here we go. wish you could enjoy our background conversation over here. We're having a blast.
We sure are. Well,
Yeah.
I just want to thank the three of you one more time for your time, your expertise, and being so willing to share the inside and the outside of what you do with our audience. Any parting thoughts before we go? Cameron.
I just want to thank you, Eli, for even suggesting this and having the idea, and thank you guys for putting this on. It's just such a great space to just bounce ideas off one another, and it's just always a pleasure talking to Eli and Yasmin, even though I've not met Yasmin before. But yeah, I don't know. As well, there's one thought that I going back to the very beginning of the conversation about why I think the guitar is so relatable, and I think her discussion of Lutherie is a good, ties it all back. I think almost like as a sartorial, as like a guitars are something that we wear and we hold on our laps, that the player has such a deep connection to, and I think Lutherie is a great portal into that, which is something, a big area of interest for me as well. And I think that that's the thing that it makes it so relatable. And I think that just kind of came to my front of my forehead, and I think that's the way it's been marketed as well. And I think it's a very effective element of it historically. Yeah.
Well put. Yasmin, how about you?
For sure. No, I mean, no. Cameron tied it up pretty nicely. I think. But yeah, thank you guys for having me and having us. This was really cool. There's not many opportunities to do something like this, especially for young players like us. So,
we're
really cool.
only too happy to do it. And Eli, how about you?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say thanks to the museum and to y'all for helping make this possible and being open to the idea, and of course to Yasmin and Cameron for being down for this and for the dear friendships and just hanging out in this format as well. I guess the only sort of parting thoughts I'd have with this time constraint would be to say that I hope that there will be many more such collaborations between the three of us and whatever permutations in the future, one of which will definitely come out next year in a form. And also that I'm somebody for whom live performance is something that really animates the kind of work I do, and that is sort of a way to end that answer that got cut off because of the connection on my end earlier. But I would hope that we in whatever contexts could make it out to Carlsbad and SoCal and all around the world, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, the invitation is wide open to all three of you. And Cameron, I'm going to let you be the leader on this one since you're here in Southern California now. Get everybody out. Y'all come on down to the museum. We would love to, A, show you around. And B,
hey, it's all open.
We'd love to have you come down and show you the museum, but also love to have you pick up some of our Play Me instruments and just wow us. So that invitation is wide open.
And we do have a harp guitar that's a playable harp guitar, Yasmin. So when you can make it by, and when the opportunity presents itself, we'll keep exploring to get some some of these up and coming young musicians on the stage, because it's a great opportunity. Yeah. All right. Well, again, yes, Eli, thank you so much for making this, bringing this all together for all these wonderful musicians and introducing us to your craft and everything. So we appreciate every single one of you and hope to see more music from you all in the future. I'm going to take a look. If you don't mind, we'll see what's coming up on the horizon for the museum. Is that okay, Bill?
It's okay with me.
All right.
You got it.
Here we go. Coming up at the Museum of Making Music in the very, very near future. Speaking of near future, tomorrow, absolutely tomorrow. I mean, unless it's an hour from now, but no, it's tomorrow. We have Albert Lee will be playing at the Museum of Making Music tomorrow on November 12th at 7 p.m. In-person seating is sold out, unfortunately. But you can still attend the virtual live stream of that event. And if you want to get tickets to the live stream, you can go to our website, museumofmakingmusic.org. And then the following week, as Bill mentioned earlier in the show, we have a program called the San Diego Sound Project. And Saturday, November 20th, we'll be featuring a local singer-songwriter and fellow guitarist, Shua, who will be playing here with his band. We have tickets for that event still, as well as a free live streaming option for that. You can check that out at museumofmakingmusic.org. Wonderful, wonderful songwriter. He really taps into the human condition and just has very heartfelt music and lyrics to follow that. So I recommend catching that show in person since our Albert Lee show is already sold out, or all of the shows. Come to all the shows. It's a lot more fun that way. Other than that, we do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you in upcoming Mom at Homes or in person at the Museum of Making Music. Until then, everyone, take care and have a wonderful day.